My wife's love for dogs was something like her signature trait, something I always respected but, until a certain point, didn't fully understand. Even before we got married, I knew she adored animals, especially dogs. She spoke about them as if they were more than just pets. To her, they were friends, family, life partners who were always there, always loyal. When we began our life together in a small house in the suburbs of Chicago, this passion became glaringly obvious. The house was furnished with the comfort of our two dogs in mind. I never objected to her desire to surround them with comfort. Toys, soft mats, bowls engraved with their names. All of it seemed natural. At the time, I even found it endearing, a quirky part of her character that set her apart from other women I had dated. Our companions were two large dogs, a Central Asian Shepherd named Rocky and a Caucasian Shepherd named Jackson. These animals were huge, strong, and incredibly loyal. From the start, I set clear rules, believing they were necessary to maintain order in the house. My main rule was about boundaries. The dogs were not allowed on the couch, and certainly not on the bed. This wasn't just about hygiene, although I felt that fur, dirt, and smells in the bed were unacceptable. For me, it was also a symbol that there had to be a hierarchy in the house. Humans first, animals second. My wife Emily disagreed. She genuinely believed that dogs deserved the same treatment as people. She would hug them, kiss them, lie down next to them when they rested. I remember her once saying, "They love us like no one else can." This was her creed, her belief, and as it turned out, it was something that couldn't be changed. Over time, her attachment to the dogs began to trouble me. I noticed her emotional bond with them growing stronger. She spent more time with them than with me. When I would come home from work, Emily was often lying on the floor with Rocky and Jackson hugging them. Sometimes she would even fall asleep there. I had to wake her up, help her up, telling her it was time for bed. But more often than not, she would respond, "I'm fine here." Our first conflicts over this started a few months after we moved into the house. I wanted the dogs to stay in their designated area, not invading our bedroom. But Emily couldn't agree with this. She insisted that the dogs should be with us because they were part of the family. I tried to convince her that such boundaries were important. I explained that the dogs wouldn't understand where their territory ended if we allowed them everything. For a while, we found a compromise. She stopped letting them into the bedroom, but she often broke that rule when I wasn't home. One day, I came home earlier than usual. I heard Emily laughing and talking to the dogs as if they were children. When I entered the bedroom, I saw her lying on the bed, snuggled up with Rocky and Jackson. That was a wake-up call for me. It was clear that my requests weren't being taken seriously. We began arguing. I said that this behavior was violating the agreements we'd made. She accused me of not understanding how important the dogs were to her. These arguments went on for a long time, and each time it felt like we were hitting a wall. I tried to stay calm, tried to understand her, but deep down, I felt that her attachment to the dogs was crossing a line. I struggled to accept that I was losing my place in her heart. Sometimes I wondered if she loved them more than she loved me. This situation slowly created tension in our marriage. Month by month, I felt us drifting further apart. We stopped discussing plans for the future like we used to. Everything revolved around the dogs. I began to doubt that our relationship could withstand such a strain. The situation with the dogs started to grow into something more than just a household disagreement. Over time, I noticed that their presence overshadowed everything else in our lives. Where once we could talk about plans for the weekend or dream about traveling, now all our conversations revolved around Rocky and Jackson. Emily could spend hours telling me how they behaved during walks, what new commands they had learned, or what she thought they were feeling at any given moment. I tried to compromise. If she wanted the dogs to accompany us on walks or travel in the car with us, I didn't object. I even began taking them with me when I went for a run in the local park. But despite all my attempts to meet her halfway, it felt like it wasn't enough. Emily, as if unaware of my efforts, continued to retreat into her world where the dogs were the central focus. The turning point came about a year after we had gotten the dogs. We had planned to meet friends for dinner at a restaurant, one of the rare moments when we had a chance to spend time alone without the pets. But a few hours before we were supposed to leave, Emily told me she couldn't leave the dogs alone. "They get lonely when we're gone," she said. I tried to convince her that it was just a few hours, that nothing would go wrong, but she refused to go. I went alone, but all evening I couldn't shake the thought of how our marriage was falling apart because of her attachment to the pets. After that incident, I began to notice other things that hadn't previously bothered me so much. Emily often put the dog's needs ahead of our own. For example, she spent significant amounts of money on their food, toys, and accessories, while we could have used that money for something more important. When I gently tried to bring this up, she would accuse me of being cold, saying I didn't understand how important they were to her. Gradually, I began to wonder where the line between love for animals and obsession was. It seemed Emily couldn't see the difference. She treated the dogs as equal partners, ignoring the fact that I too needed her attention and care. The situation escalated dramatically one evening. Coming home from work, I found my wife asleep on the bed, with 2 dogs. But this time it was different. She was completely naked, cuddled tightly against her 4-legged friends. Shocked, I woke her up. Her explanation made me think, though it didn't excuse her act. She confessed that her love for dogs is so strong that it borders on obsession. She feels a deep connection with them, and that connection is so intense that it grows into more than just a love for pets. She spoke of being jealous of other dogs, of wanting to be around them all the time, of feeling a sense of complete unity and understanding that she cannot find in other relationships. She confessed that she only feels comfortable and secure in their presence, that dogs are a source of unconditional love and acceptance for her. The discovery I made was a real blow to me. I wouldn't say I immediately went into a panic. My mind told me to proceed in a careful, planned manner, so I decided to install hidden cameras in our house. This decision was not easy for me. I realized that I was invading my wife's personal space, but the weight of suspicion, which tormented me for several weeks, outweighed all these moral torment. I chose high-resolution night vision cameras, mounting them in strategic locations, including our bedroom. The recording was continuous, and I decided to review it only 2 days later, to let the events play out naturally. The first few hours of the recording did not bring anything unusual. My wife was doing chores around the house, cleaning, cooking, walking our 2 dogs. After lunch, when I was usually at work, she brought the dogs into the bedroom. At first it seemed innocent to me. However, then she began to undress, slowly, freeing herself from her clothes. The tape clearly showed her movements, her face, the expression in her eyes. I saw her petting the dogs, gently stroking their fur, whispering something in their ears. For a moment I thought that perhaps she was just playing, but my doubts were soon dispelled. She started kissing the dogs, not just short, perfunctory kisses, but long, passionate kisses, breathlessly, with the very undercurrent of desire that I had been missing in our relationship. It wasn't just a display of animal love, but something much more, something that knocked the ground out from under my feet. I was amazed, stunned. She kissed them with far more passion than she had ever kissed me. Then, the tape showed scenes of an intimate nature. I won't describe them in detail. It's too painful for me. Suffice it to say that my wife performed acts with the dogs that went far beyond mere affection. It was horrible, disgusting, and painful at the same time. I'd assumed infidelity. I'd entertained the idea that all was not well in our relationship. But this was beyond my darkest assumptions. The pain was unbearable. I felt cheated, betrayed, devastated, not just as a husband, but as a human being. I decided that it was only a prank, that it was a weakness that my wife had allowed. I convinced myself of this. I wanted to believe it, and so I decided to save our marriage. our relationship, because I loved my wife. I decided to forget what I had seen, like a terrible dream. I didn't say anything to my wife. Soon, an event occurred that finally convinced me that our relationship had reached an impasse. It was a regular Friday evening. I suggested to Emily that we go out for dinner at a restaurant she loved. At first, she agreed, but then half an hour before we were supposed to leave, she changed her mind. "Rocky isn't feeling well," she said. "I need to stay with him." I tried to explain that we could leave the dogs at home for a short time, but she looked at me as if I had suggested something incredibly cruel. "You just don't understand how important this is," she said, her voice filled with reproach, as if I were the selfish one. I left alone, feeling utterly empty. At the restaurant, I found myself thinking that I didn't even want to go back home. For the first time in all this time, I felt that our home was no longer a place where I could be happy. It had become Emily's home, a home for her and her dogs, but not mine. In the following weeks, our relationship deteriorated completely. We hardly spoke, except for everyday matters. I tried to be honest with myself, asking the question, how much longer could I endure this life? I genuinely loved Emily, but her obsession with the dogs had turned our marriage into something painful. The turning point came one evening when I came home to find Emily asleep in our bed with Rocky and Jackson. I stood frozen at the doorway, not knowing how to react. They had done it again. I understood it, and I felt shattered. I felt shock, disgust, and at the same time, a strange sense of bitter clarity. In that moment, I realized that things had gone far beyond what I could have imagined. When I decided to confront Emily, she initially tried to avoid the subject. But after my persistent pressure, she finally admitted that her bond with the dogs was not just a passing interest. She spoke of how they had become a source of something she couldn't find in our marriage. Her words were confusing, but there was truth in them that I didn't want to accept. She saw the dogs not as animals, but as something more, something beyond just companions in life. This truth became the final straw. I realized that there was no way to save our family anymore. It was too much. The conversation ended with me packing my things and going to stay with a friend for a few days to clear my head. I spent a long time trying to understand where I went wrong. Perhaps I hadn't given Emily what she needed, but I couldn't justify her actions. A few weeks later, we filed for divorce. It was a difficult process. Emily didn't resist. It seemed like she had already made this decision for herself long ago. She stayed in our home with the dogs, and I began looking for a new place to live. The divorce was a trial for me, but at the same time, it was a form of release. Now, looking back, I understand that sometimes love, no matter how strong, can't overcome insurmountable differences. It hurts to remember that our marriage ended this way, but perhaps it was the only way out.